What is good, everybody? Welcome back to Return My Capital. Today, we're going to take a look at the somewhat recently announced fee expense ratio cut announced by Vanguard. Vanguard, already a producer known for their industry exceptionally low expense ratios. That being said, they reduced them even further, estimated to save investors more than $350 million in 2025 alone. This was announced, effective February 1st of 2025 here. So expense ratios essentially were reduced across 87 different funds. I don't really cover index funds primarily or bond funds. We're just going to talk about a couple of different ETFs here, some that you may recognize, some that you may not. For example, you've got VIG here. That's the dividend appreciation ETF. The expense ratio was 0.06, now down to 0.05. You'll see here VIG. Again, this is essentially their dividend growth ETF. Performed unbelievably well over the past 10 years, actually, especially for a dividend growth focused ETF. You'll see why. We'll take a look at the holdings here in just a second. But these are still high growth companies that just happen to pay a dividend. These are not necessarily companies that you would invest in if you're focused on a high yield dividend investment, more so a dividend growth focus over decades. To really allow that dividend to compound over time. But again, VIG here, you see the top 10 holdings. You're going to see a lot of tech, okay? But Apple, Microsoft, Broadcom, again, companies that pay relatively minimal yields, but exceptional growth, double-digit 5-year CAGRs on companies like this. You see a company like Costco in there, maybe the best dividend growth story in the history of stocks, certainly over the past decade or 2 decades. United Health, MasterCard, Exxon, Visa, Eli Lilly, and JP Morgan make up the top 10 individual holdings of VIG. And you see the sector breakdowns here: tech, financials, healthcare, and consumer defensive leading the way, followed up by industrials, consumer cyclical, materials, energy, and a little bit of utility and very minimal communication exposure. Not a ton of holdings in this. Well, excuse me, a fair amount of holdings in this one. 341 individual holdings make up VIG here. The top 10 weighting is 31%. So actually fairly diversified for an ETF. Again, this is a dividend growth ETF. The yield is 1.88%. So certainly not a high growth, a high yielding dividend ETF. But again, 0.06% on that expense ratio, now 0.05. So a little 0.01 reduction there for VIG. You see VGT here from 0.1% down to 0.09%. This is their IT sector ETF. Now, I had done a video of all 11 sector specific ETFs. From Vanguard anyway. I'll link to that down below if you want to look at any particular sector or just see a comparison across all 11 sectors. VGT would be the one of the 11 that has the most assets under management. IT is the largest sector in the S&P 500. If you're going to invest thematically in one sector, certainly IT has been the best performer over the last 10, 15 years. So it makes sense that is the largest weighting. A couple others here: this FTSE Emerging Market ETF, the Total International Stock ETF, VXUS, probably the most, there's no probably about it. It is the most common and most heavily invested internationally focused ETF for US investors. And then this VEA, the FTSE Developed Markets ETF. So these are all internationally focused ETFs. Looking here at VEU, again, this is the FTSE All World XUS. That was reduced from 0.05 expense to 0.04, and you'll see almost a 3% yield on this. But what I want you to take a look at here this is the, let me go back to the actual Vanguard page here. So I want to just sort of call your attention to this. This is developed markets, right? So these are going to be perhaps more mature companies, more first world, you might say. So this is VEA, developed markets. Let me go over to VEA here. So developed markets. So you'll see the top 10 holdings. You're going to notice primarily European and Japanese stocks here in the top 10, but this ETF is tracking 4,000 companies, and the top 10 holdings don't quite make up 10% of this ETF. So not even an average of a 1% weighting of the top 10 holdings. Extremely diversified. Again, this is the developed markets VXUS ETF. Top holding would be SAP, followed by Nestle, ASML, Roche, Shell, AstraZeneca, Novartis, Novo Nordisk, Toyota, and HSBC. So certainly those would be companies that you may recognize. These are some of the largest international companies, right? Now, something that is interesting, okay, so that's the developed markets top 10 holdings. Now, if we look at emerging markets, something that it just caught my eye. So this is VWO, 0.08% down to 0.07%. Let's see here. Okay, so emerging markets, right? VWO, 0.08 down to 0.07 on the expense ratio. Something I thought was interesting is that when you're looking at the top 10 holdings here, what are you seeing? Chinese companies, right? So, and this is a conversation for another day, another platform, whatever, but China is still classified as an emerging market, even though it, very likely the second largest economy in the world. So you've got TSM, the Taiwan Semi Manufacturing, Tencent Holdings, Alibaba, HDFC Bank, Meituan Class B, Xiaomi Corporation, Reliance Industries, PDD, I think that's Pinduoduo Holdings, China Construction Bank, and ICICI Bank. So 5,000 holdings in this. Again, this is the Vanguard emerging markets. So you could think of these as developing nations, third world countries, but kind of crazy that Chinese companies, China in general, is still considered an emerging economy, even though it's the second largest economy in the world. And certainly some people have argued for years that it's actually the largest economy in the world. But again, another conversation for another day. 5,000 holdings in this one. Top 10 make up 22.5% of the entire ETF. Let's go ahead and move back to the Vanguard release here. So we covered the developed and the emerging from the FTSE, VEA, and VWO. Now you've also got VXUS. Again, this is the largest of the internationally focused ETFs. It's got almost 500 billion in assets under management, so extremely substantial. Now, this was actually the expense ratio decrease that caught my attention the most, moving down from 0.08% all the way down to 0.05%. So a pretty substantial cut. And actually, it's really a fantastic ETF, right? You've got 8,700 total holdings in this ETF. The top 10 holdings don't even make up 10%. So you are getting unbelievable exposure and diversification to 9,000 companies, all domiciled outside of the United States. So if you're looking for broad market, international diversification, VXUS is typically that one-stop shop for most investors. Very common portfolio allocation that you'll see is a certain percentage allocated to VU or VTI for that US exposure, and then a certain percentage allocated to VXUS, and it's your broad umbrella to get exposure to the rest of the world. Top 10 holdings, you'll recognize these as sort of a combination of those other two international ETFs we just talked about, but top 10 are TSM, Tencent, SAP, Alibaba, Nestle, ASML, Roche, Shell, AstraZeneca, and Novartis. So combination here, I mean, it's all outside of the US, but heavily in Europe and Taiwan, Japan, China. Makes sense. Moving along with a couple of the other ETFs that caught my attention. So again, all of the sector-specific ETFs, such as VOX, which is communication services, VCR, consumer discretionary, all of those moved from 0.1% down to 0.09%. So we're not going to name off all of those. I will link to that video down below that I made that covered all of the sector ETFs specifically. You've got VEU, which is the FTSE All World, VXUS, so broad international exposure, the VEA, the VWO for developed and emerging markets. You've got Europe and Pacific specific ETFs, those move down from 0.09 to 0.06 for VGK, and then 0.08 down to 0.07 for VPL. So let's take a look at VGK here. Again, this is a European specific ETF. So if you're bullish on the prospects coming out of Europe, well, this is your ETF. You'll notice the top 10 holdings here, very similar to previous ETFs that we just talked about: SAP, Nestle, ASML, Roche, Shell, AstraZeneca, Novartis, Novo Nordisk, HSBC, and then Siemens. All fantastic companies. 1,260 total holdings here in the European focused ETF. Top 10 holdings only make up 18%. And then we've got this VPL, which is the Vanguard Pacific Index Fund. Now, if we take a look at this, you'll notice that this is not Chinese companies, right? Because China is still classified as an emerging market for whatever reason. But that being said, you've got 2,400 total companies in this ETF. Top 10 holdings make up about 16.5%. Of the individual holdings. The top holding is Toyota, followed by Samsung, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, Mitsubishi, Sony, BHP Group, Hitachi, Sumitomo Mitsui Financial Group, that's a mouthful, AIA Group, and CSL. So Korea, Japan, Australia, kind of making up that ETF. Let's see here. Anything else that we wanted to cover from Vanguard here? Again, more sector-specific ETFs, the healthcare, the industrials, the IT. Yeah, some bond ETFs. And then some more index funds down here. But just quick video. Expense ratios cut across 87 different funds, 168 share classes. Some people would argue certainly that Vanguard already has the lowest expense ratios in the business and that they should allocate that capital towards improving the user experience of their brokerage, of their website, of their app, of their support for customers. But that being said, it's still a fantastic thing for investors who leverage their ETFs for their portfolio, regardless of what brokerage they're using. So thank you very much for watching. Take care, like and subscribe. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.